Hey guys, this is Monica at Academic Phoenix Plus, and today we are going to go over more UV mapping. In the previous tutorials, I showed you how to use 4 tools under UVs, including automatic, which I don't recommend, cylindrical, planar, and spherical. Today we're going to UV map a little bit more complicated object, such as this bench. You can download this model at academicphoenixplus.com under download, so feel free to download it for free. While you're there, why don't you go ahead and sign up for my newsletter so you can get pre-release content, workshops, and other perks. So again, that's academicphoenixplus.com. All right, guys, so when we're looking at an object, we really need to figure out the shapes and what tools we should use. So I'm going to rip this off by clicking under UV, clicking this, so we can take a look at what we have. We have to look at the base and all of our pieces. So let's go and close this, Maya Classic. Instead of using the workspace Maya Classic, we're going to go to UV editing. So yes, this is going to be a disaster. Let's take a look at it, what it looks like with the grid on. Okay, so there's no way we're going to be able to texture an object like this. So the purpose of UV mapping is to be able to unravel this disaster and put it in a logical way so that when we texture something, we'll be able to have not only it's a predictable, we understand where all the textures are going to go, but it's also organized and clean and in the 0 to 1 space. So we're going to be using multiple UV tools to be able to UV map this object. So let's start with the top. Very similar to a cylinder on our previous exercise, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. So let's project. So I am going to go to the side view, which I think will be easier for me to select. I'm going to go to faces and just select these faces. And then I'm going to come back here, maybe turn off the grid so you can see what's going on, and just want to double check to make sure I am selecting the faces that I need so that it's nice and even on all sides. All right, so this one's a little complicated because on this side, it's on the side, but over here, it's at the top. I might actually just remove this. There we go. So UV's cylindrical mapping. I'm going to expand this a little bit so you can see the projection. I'm going to grab this red one and I'm going to close it. Now the issue is that it is hard to see you see how the rectangles are not looking like squares, so we need to grab this green one and just make it long. And it may look long, like it may look a little odd, but our goal is to make sure these squares look like squares from here, from our texture. So then we'll know that when we texture this, it's going to be accurate. So it looks like this, and I'm going to grab this and move it aside. Okay, great. Now, how do we select the top and bottom? Well, you know, what's nice about the UV editor is, going to go to face, right-click face, is that if I've already had this selected and the only thing left is the bottom and the top, I could just select the faces via the UV editor. So I'm going to select this section and notice that it selected the faces that I need, which is perfect. I'm going to go to UV mapping, planar options. I'm choosing Y. Make sure keep image with height ratio is on and apply. Move it aside. Now, click on this. You're going to see that it is overlapping, so double click on one of them and move it aside. This one is red, so double click, close this. I'm going to go to my UV toolkit. Under transform, I'm looking for flip and flip. Okay, great. So another thing that we mentioned in the previous tutorial is the scale. You notice how large this scale is versus this one. We have to make sure that they are as close to the same scale as possible. So I'm going to double click on these two and I'm going to probably make them just as big as here so that when I put the texture on, it's going to be the same scale. There we go. So now we have this UV map fairly quickly. All right, let's take a look at a little bit more organic shape. This is what's fun about this model is that it's a little bit organic, so we do get to play around a little bit with its results. So for example, I might double click on this and I can go to unfold and click unfold and see what I get. So Unfold tries to do a good job in laying out the UVs and making sure that everything is nice and even, but I also don't like it to be that wiggly, so I'm just going to skip it. But so sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. All right, let's take a look at, wow, one of the legs. If I go to UVs, cylindrical mapping, so I'm going to close it just because it's a complete cylinder. Now this is a good time to talk about the seam. Notice where the seam is going to be laid out. I'm going to turn this off so you guys can see it. The seam is going to be right here in the front. Now, you usually want to avoid that. You usually want to put the seam in somewhere where you can't see it. So probably in the back. So I am going to scroll in, and you see how there's a little T, little red T. I'm going to click on that. And what it does is activate the manipulator. You see how I'm activating the manipulator? I'm going to click. I want to rotate it. The rotation's missing, but there's this blue circle around it. I'm going to click on this blue circle, and now I have rotation. So I'm going to rotate this to the back until the seam is in the back. All right, that looks pretty good. All right, next let's take a look at our grid scale. Notice that it is really stretched out, so I'm going to scale it flat, scale it down until it looks like squares. That actually looks pretty good. And I'm going to move it aside. Now, when you look at the projection, go to object mode. This thing is really big, so if you want to, you can just scale it uniformly and bring it in. Great. So good news is that the seam is in the back. The bad news is that it's not really even. So for example, notice that there's this really nice straight line, and then it kind of does this little step. We really want to make sure that that seam is as straight as possible, because texturing this is going to be a little bit more complicated if there's a bunch of steps like this. And then we got to talk about the bottom. So I am going to do the cutting and sewing. So very similar to paper, I want to have a straight line going through here. So I want to cut these edges. So I'm selecting these edges that I'm going to cut. Under cut and sew, you're going to click on cut. So now these guys are by themselves. All right, so if I go to face and I double click there, I can move this and separate them. So I've cut it on that edge. But now I want to add these to this side. Now I could drag it over here and, you know, go through all that effort, but what I'm going to do instead is select the edges that need to be sewn together. So it's very similar to, I don't want to say paper because you don't sew paper together, but it's more like cloth. You're going to sew where the edges need to be attached. So I'm going to select the edges, and then I'm going to stitch together, which is going to move and stitch the pieces together, which is exactly what I want. Now look how clean that is, nice and straight. Now we do have a little bit of an issue at the bottom, but let's see what happens if we double click and we unfold. I'm not too convinced. Let's see what that looks like. So it looks pretty good, but then it gets a little wanky or really crazy at the bottom. So I think I'm just going to undo and leave it in a nice even way. The bottom of this object. Now, should we UV map this or not? If I was working in a studio, and the answer is probably going to be yes, I would UV map this. So I'd probably do a quick planar mapping. But honestly, you should probably ask your director if you're going to see this, because you're going to be spending a lot of time trying to UV map this section. Sometimes no one's going to see the bottom of the bench of this stool. So the question you have to ask the director is, are you going to see it? But if you are going to see it, like for example, what if the hero picks this thing up and jams it at somebody and towards the camera? Well, they're going to see that, so that you really need to make sure that that's UV mapped. So those are the type of things you have to analyze. Is it really necessary to take the time to UV map the bottom if no one's going to see it? So just for the heck of it, I'm going to go ahead and planar map it. And I'm going to shrink it down and bring it over here. And so now I have to really shrink it down so it matches with the grid. Something like that. Maybe slightly bigger. Then I can grab an edge, and just to make sure it sticks together, I am going to stitch together. There we go. Oops. Well, guess what happened? It looks like this is backwards. All right, double click. Let's go ahead and transform, scroll down, flip, grab an edge. Here we go. Here we go again. Stitch together. Okay, perfect. So now the bottom is UV mapped and this whole eye object is UV mapped. So perfect. I would say let's go ahead and UV map the rest of these, but I'm going to show you a trick later on, probably in the plus section. So just wait until the very end and I'll show you a fun little trick. Okay, so let's look at this one. Same thing, it looks like a cylinder. Let's go to UVs, cylindrical mapping. I'm going to close this, but notice how crazy it looks. The UVs look just as crazy as almost like before. Not as crazy, but it's really going to be impossible to UV map. The projection doesn't seem to be working very well. It worked perfectly with the leg, but for whatever reason, the support system isn't looking very good. And the reason why is because of the direction of the geometry. The geometry direction is going left to right, but the projection is going up and down, right? So this object was going up and down, so the projection fitted perfectly. However, this one's on the side, so therefore the projection's not matching it. And I did show you a little hint earlier, but the way to fix that is we are going to click on this little red T. So click on the little red T. That's going to give you rotate. Click on that blue circle, blink, and then you're going to rotate your projection. Now this takes practice. By rotating it, you're going to start noticing that the piece is starting to look a little bit more square. Now, this is a cylinder, so it should start looking a little bit more squarish, rectangulish. And that's really our goal, but this isn't as easy as just rotating it. This is not only rotating a little bit upward, but it's also slightly diagonal. So we have a little bit of rotating to do. So my goal is to try to rotate this while looking at this projection here. Rotating the projection while looking at this UV map, trying to figure out a way to make it look as square as possible. So I'm going like this. Obviously going to the left isn't working. Or to the right. Let me go to the left. You see how it's starting to unfold? Ooh, up, getting close. Look at that. That's not bad. Let me see if I can get it a little better. There we go. Pretty neat, huh? So by using the projection and making sure that it's rotated accordingly, you can get a projection that's already almost done. Now, I do have to clean it up, but it's basically almost there. So I think it's in a good place. I'm going to go ahead and turn all this off because I do need to clean it up a little bit. Now, similar to what it was before, we have some edges. So I'm going to double click on this edge here, and I'm going to cut, and I'm going to select the edges that need to be sewn together, and then I'm going to stitch together. So now that looks nice. Take a look at the grid. The grid's looking okay. I think I can do a little better job. I'm going to scale it down a little bit until it looks like a square. And I am going to click unfold. And the reason why is, and it looks nice. Oops, there's a seam right in the middle. Oh, man, I'm going to have to show you how to fix that. Okay. Unfolding did a better job because in this one, this is a pretty straight cylinder, but this one's actually very organic. It's very curved. So therefore, Unfold does a better job with those pieces. There's no way I'll be able to tweak those UVs myself to make it look like that scale, but this looks pretty good. All right, let's go ahead and I'm going to change my seam to be in the back. So I'm double clicking here, which is the edge where I want the seam to be. I am going to cut. Now, because I moved it, we'll see what's going to happen. I'm pretty sure I screwed up. Let's see. Let's go ahead and I might have to undo. We'll see. Select these guys, and then I'm going to say stitch together, which I'm sure it's very upset right now, so it doesn't look good. So let's click unfold, and there you go. The seams in the back, the UVs are happy. And the areas that are warped, no one's gonna see, so I'm not too worried about it. It is a little, whoops, it is rotated weird, so I'm gonna rotate it so it's easy to texture, or if I want to, maybe give the artist a hint that this is the support system, and therefore I'm going to scale it. All right, so we've UV mapped the seat. We've UV mapped, ooh, what's happening here? Is this red? Oh no. We UV map the seat, we UV map the leg, we UV map the support system, and now I want to UV map this tiny little guy right here. Now I could cylindrical map it, but it's just a nub that no one's gonna see, so I'm gonna kind of stare at it. I'm gonna go to UV map, planar mapping options, and instead of any of these X, Y's, and Z's, I'm gonna use the camera and apply. There you go. Easy peasy. I'm gonna scale it down because it really doesn't need that much information. It's a tiny little nub. And there we go. All right, so basically we have UV mapped every item that we need. And the next part would be to place it into 0 to 1 space. Now we haven't UV mapped everything, so that's why you see this craziness, but I want to go ahead and demonstrate to you, place everything into the 0 to 1 space. Everything needs to fit in here, so I'm going to go in and just kind of scale it down, double check the scale. Maybe move this over here, like so. Okay, then comes the leg. Might as well select that too. Double click, scale it down. You want to scale it uniformly. Maybe this is a pretty long piece, so you might need to make it a little longer. This is the support system. So deselect this one, move this over here. Okay, good. And then we have the little nub. This little nub. Okay, let's go to object mode. I'm going to right click, go to UVs. It's a little easier for me to control it, and move this over here. It's small, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, they have been basically laid out in a 0 to 1 space, but I'm not really convinced, because the reality is if I turn this off, this could be a little bigger. So I want to make sure that the areas, and I'm just going to keep these even. I just want to I'm going to try to maximize what's called maximizing my 0 to 1 space. What that means is that I really want to make sure that my UVs are large enough and I take up as much of the UV space as possible, because otherwise this is lost information. So the information that's here that's not going to have any texture information is going to be lost. So there is this really big gap here, and there's a couple of things I can do to make this a little bit more fill up the space more. So for example, let's think about overlapping. Now I mentioned in the past that overlapping is bad unless you want it overlap. So if this is going to be a wooden stool and this is basically cut and these are the rings of the wood and out here is the bark, then the chances are this is the rings of the wood as well. So I could overlap my object. But so those are the type of things you might want to consider. Other things we can do is overlap maybe this edge here. So instead of having this long UV map, we can in fact cut it and then overlap it. So I think I want to do that. So I'm going to select that ring, that edge, double click. I'm going to cut, double click here, and just kind of bring them close together. So what's nice about this is I can scale this up so that it takes more space, like so. I might have to scale this down a little bit. And then everything else can be moved down. So again, I'm just maximizing my 0 to 1 space. Let's see what that looks like. So that's got a little bit more information. Everything's looking still pretty good. Same scale, scale-ish. I think this one's a little big. Maybe scale it down a little bit. And so on and so forth. Great. All right, so that is how you UV map those 3 items, or 4, including this little nub. And now comes the plus side. I'm going to show you a trick. Before you start UV mapping everything else, let me show you the extra bonus part. This is the plus in Academic Phoenix Plus. Okay, so we have everything UV mapped, but we still have all of these other crazy looking UVs, and we need to fix them. So what's fancy about UV mapping is that as long as the geometry is exactly the same, you can transfer the UVs to another object. So let's say, for example, I'm going to select this leg that's UV mapped, and I'm going to shift select this leg. Under Mesh, there's something called Transfer Attributes, and I want you to go to the options. I'm going to go to Edit, Reset, Settings, Edit, Reset, Settings. And the only thing you need to make sure is to click on Component and Apply. Now, it may not look like anything happened, but the UVs are now transferred and they are connected. So that means that whatever I do to this UV map, it will affect this UV map. You can break that connection by deleting the history. But now you notice that this is UV mapped and the UV maps are literally on top of one another. They're overlapping. So we're going to do the same thing. Select I'm going to call this the parent. This is the child, and then apply. Very quickly, you have UV mapped two objects thanks to transfer attributes. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to the other one. So when I click on this, shift click on, oops, make sure that's not selected. Select this, then click on this, click apply. Click this, the other one, and then click the letter G. G means the last command that you made. So I don't have to keep clicking apply. I can just click the letter G, which makes things faster. Why did I do that? Because I have to find the nub. Where's the nub? It's probably this one. There it is. Because I have a lot more nubs. So I want to make sure that when I select the nubs, I can just click G instead of keep clicking apply. So click this one, shift G. I'm going to deselect this one, click on this one, G. Deselect that one, rotate, click on this one, G. Deselect, select, G. Now you may be asking, wait, Monica, why can't I just grab all of them all at once? Unfortunately, it doesn't work. I can only do one at a time, and it's terrible because I did a library filled with books, and I just assumed that I could just UV map everything all at once, and it turns out that I couldn't. I couldn't transfer attributes for all the books. I had to go one by one. So you usually, if you're going to create a library of books, I recommend that you UV map first and then duplicate. That will make your life easier. But sometimes you don't have control over your UVs or the model. Sometimes the models are given to you. So now you know how to quickly transfer UVs. Just like that, we now have a UV mapped object. All pieces have been UV mapped, and this is ready to be textured. Let's go to edit, delete by type history. Again, I always say modify, freeze transformations. And the purpose for that is because I want to make sure that whoever receives, the texture artist who receives this model, knows that this is ready to go. There's no extra information and it's ready to rock and roll. So make sure you clear your history. Well, guys, I hope that was helpful. The next step would be to take this and texture it. Let me know if you have any questions about UV mapping. I know it can be a little tedious, but every 3D object has a UV map, so it's very helpful. It's very important to learn how to do this. Again, you can download this file at Academic Phoenix Plus so you can follow along. And if you like these videos, please share. Thank you everybody for your support, and I will see you in the next tutorial.